So this is updates from other jurisdictions. So we'll be hearing from lead clinical representatives from across Australia and New Zealand to provide an update on particle therapy facility projects in their own jurisdictions. First up, I'd like to welcome Associate Professor Verity Ahern. Verity Ahern is known to many of us in the community. She's a senior radiation oncologist at Westmead in Sydney, and also the chairperson of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Radiologists Particle Therapy Special Interest Group.
So thank you very much for asking me to present an update from New South Wales. I guess over the last 12 months, we submitted an update to our business case from the National Particle Treatment and Research Centre on the Westmead Precinct. I thought it was worth reviewing the objective of this centre, and that's to provide a world-class facility to lead in the treatment of adult and paediatric cancers with particle beam therapy, including carbon and other ions, as well as protons. We aim to develop and be part of a collaborative national network for clinical practice, education and research to support the wider development and utilisation of particle therapy across Australia and New Zealand as well. And also to provide a focus for internationally competitive clinical biology, physics, engineering, translational and applied research, again in partnership with other proton and particle therapy facilities across Australia. Over the last 12 months, our proton group within our radiation oncology department has been active. Our group comprises several oncologists, medical physicists, radiation therapists. Each of the members of our groups are contributing to the wider working groups of our respective colleges. And we're also leading and contributing to grant applications in the particle therapy space. We're doing comparative proton planning and hoping to move into carbon ion planning with a loaner license from research temporarily to see what that looks like. We've appointed to our permanent radiation oncology staff a radiation oncologist who's completed a proton therapy fellowship in the UK. We've been supporting research students, so a radiation oncologist towards a PhD, and we've also supported a Masters of Medical Physics student who was awarded a high distinction from Sydney Uni on his study of computational investigation to the radiobiological effects of secondary particles in scanning beam proton therapy. And we hope this student will go on to a PhD and that will be successful in attracting many other students towards research projects that will inform particle therapy clinical practice in Australia. We've also been participating in the journal clubs and proton planning workshops that have been held. So in August this year, we found out that an unsolicited proposal had been made to the New South Wales government for a particle therapy facility, including carbon ions, on the Westmead precinct. This sits with government, and it's not a process that I'm a part of and can speak to. So I think at this point, it's important for me to say that whatever happens, we expect the National Particle Treatment Facility will function very much as a clinical facility, not simply a research facility, but it will be clinically integrated into the Children's Hospital at Westmead and the adult hospitals, so that patients who are referred from elsewhere across Australia and New Zealand are managed as part of our broader cancer service and not in a standalone facility. I'd like to also emphasise that the Westmead National Particle Therapy Facility has been developed very much in partnership with our colleagues in Adelaide and also our colleagues Metro North in Brisbane, who are all part of the vision to bring particle therapy to Australia. And we hope that while we applaud and are very excited for the success of our colleagues in Adelaide, that we don't see that as being the only facility in Australia. We expect there will be more than one facility, and we'll continue to work with our clinical colleagues around Australia and New Zealand to ensure that that is done in a collaborative way. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that update, Verity. Next, we'll move on to Dr. Claire Phillips, who I understand is serving as an acting director at the Peter Mac Institute in Melbourne.
Of course, there continues to be a lot of interest in Victoria, particularly in what we call the Parkville precinct, which is Peter Mac and the Children's Hospital just a kilometre down the road, because we have, very large paediatric services in both of those departments. And then the broader adult indications for proton beam therapy are also of great interest to our subspecialty groups here at Peter Mac in the adult setting. So we're definitely having a lot of ongoing and very constructive conversations, particularly with the Children's Hospital, with a view to basically modifying the pre-existing business case, which people will recall was really done at the behest of the Health Department, coming to us about 5 years ago before the Adelaide funding was confirmed, because that's a bit out of date, really. And given the Adelaide facility and, an expectation that other states are also very interested, I suppose we're reframing that more at a Victorian level with perhaps, input from Tasmania and New Zealand friends rather than any national facility idea, which is what the previous business case entailed. So, our health department's a bit subsumed by COVID at the moment. We don't think it's the right time to be sticking a new proposal on their desk just at the moment, but it's certainly something that we're working towards in the medium to near future. So all I'm really going to talk about otherwise today, and it's not going to be very much, is about our clinical interests, pretty similar to what Verity and the team have been doing at Westmead with regard to having developed a particular multidisciplinary group around proton therapy. We have Michelle Lee, who I think is online if she hasn't gone to bed. She's in the UK at the moment doing a fellowship at the Christie. And recently we've been able to upgrade to an Eclipse version, which gives us a lot of facility to learn about proton planning on cases that we're sharing with Adelaide. So just a bit more detail around that. The multidisciplinary working group, which was convened by Jerry Hanna before he left, unfortunately for family reasons has returned to the UK. This is essentially interested radiation oncologists, RTs and physicists, and so meeting roughly 6 monthly, ideally 3 times a year, really to try to keep some momentum and interest, stimulate interest in CPD activities, and also to develop knowledge and capacity around proton beam planning and decision making. Some of the lead people in that really are these two here, Lisa Hall, who's our radiation therapy lead at NAD, and Yo, who we'll hear about later today, I think. They're both involved in these credentialing packaging programs, which are being done as a national thing. Thomas, everybody will know well, is an active member of the physicists group around proton beam therapy. Our Eclipse update is quite interesting and fun. It's provided us with perhaps some more optimal planning capacity, which we're just starting to explore, which has got a proper dual energy CT understanding, I suppose is the word. So it gives us better tissue definition, better plans, really. There's also the capacity to build a rapid plan knowledge-based planning system within it. Obviously, we don't have a lot of plans to put in it at the moment, but for those who aren't aware, rapid plan, you put more and more plans in, and it's a kind of like, it's not really AI, but it's certainly machine learning helps you to come up with better plans based on what's been done before. And that's available for proton beam therapy, but will require a little bit of scripting by clever physicists and IT people to get that to work as well as possible. And then again, in liaison with the Adelaide group, our team has been starting to explore planning, developing some skills in that space. And I think they've done about 7 or 8 cases already. I found it very interesting and rewarding, as was the workshop case for this conference today. So that's pretty much all I've got to say at this space. Probably in about 6 to 12 months, we'll have a bit more idea about where we're really heading in Victoria with regard to a business case and government interest. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that update. So next we're going to switch over to Queensland. I just got a message that Liz Kenny may or may not be online, so we'll just see if she's ready. So Liz, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Peter.
Yep.
So sorry.
Good morning. We can hear you and we can see you loud and clear. Go ahead.
It's actually been a most interesting 18 months for a lot of reasons. But at the end of the day, I think we currently have a concerted effort with considerable backing to develop the Queensland Comprehensive Cancer Centre on the Hurston Quarter. We understand that it's a very difficult time, and that we've been very and continue to be and will continue to be focused on managing the rollout of the pandemic and then the endemic. And yet in the scheme of everything, I think we've considered it our job to try and maintain the focus on the long term and on the current care of patients, and of course in our world, patients affected by cancer. And so part of the underpinning plans for the Comprehensive Cancer Centre, which will be a very large build, and hopefully housing all but ICU, basically, of everything to do with cancer on our campus. Having a proton facility in that is actually a core part of what would make this a really important plan going forward. The proposal that will need to be put to Treasury is a very substantial amount of money, very, very large, with protons only being part of it. It's we've had a slight, I guess not glitch, but dip in that the chief executive of Metro North, who was so solidly behind all of this, has left and joined one of the big firms, but put plans and processes in place to more than likely enable this. So, Peter, I really don't know that I can say too much more at this point in time, because by no means is this a fait accompli. We have a bit of an opportunity, however, in that even though governments are very constrained, the capital investment, which of course is always divorced from the investment in staff and processes, but the desire for major capital investment in the state that's smart and clever and of great community worth is actually still high on their agenda, and that again gives us hope. We've always, I would add, and I'm so sorry I came in just on the end of Claire's presentation, but we have always touted the critical importance of a national collaboration in this regard, with the big facility being at Westmead, and we hold true to that. And so, although I don't really know what's been said before, that's been part of the whole philosophy going forward here. So it's still firmly on our radar. Do we have approval to proceed? No. Do we still have backing and support from our hospital and health service, which is one of the largest, of course? Yes. Is it then going to be part of a very large build? If it goes ahead, the answer is yes. And so that's obviously going to also take time, because to put up a 14 or 15 story building is obviously going to take lots of money and lots of effort. So that's where we're at the moment, Peter. We struggle to have the investment in our people to enable them to really become part of the proton therapy planning and comparison commitment. It's one of our ongoing challenges that, in fact, the number of patients that we see has not reduced. In fact, it's gone up. The number of actual treatments that we deliver, the number of fractions that we deliver has gone down. And so our bean counters look at that and think, oh, well, you've got reduced activity, perhaps you can have reduced staff. All of the wrong thinking that is very hard to correct. And so I think we feel greatly that we don't currently contribute to the comparative planning, and we'd love to. And so I think if we get a commitment that the Comprehensive Cancer Centre will proceed or is likely to proceed, that's obviously going to be a very early investment in people and processes. So I think that's probably all I have to say.
Thank you, Liz. I just want to point out that, you know, many of the points raised already in the three presentations are shared amongst all of us. So we're all up against these challenges in different ways. Next, we'll switch to Professor Joshua Dash, who's a radiation oncologist from Perth in Western Australia.
Very briefly, three main slides. Thank you for allowing me to just give a quick talk on the sort of wildflower state of Western Australia. Just to go into our geography, as you probably know, it's 2.6 million square miles, and we have a population of 2.6 million, which predominantly is in the Perth region and the southwest, making 80%. Our cancer incidence in WA is about 13,500. That was the 2017 Cancer Council figures. And our premier is McGowan, which, you know, when we sneeze, we shut the borders. So the fundamental sort of crude modeling that we looked at with the 13,500, looking at sort of models that were used in Europe and in sort of America. And essentially with 13,500, we estimated about 810, that's the red with the yellow sort of letters, 810 patients per year that may benefit from proton therapy in WA. And if we boiled it down to Sir Charles Gardner, where I'm at, which is one of the tertiary centers, we estimated for our area, we would be about 375 cases that could benefit from proton therapy. We see about 2,500 new cases every year. So that's roughly sort of where we've got to. So where does this all lead to? Well, the Harry Perkins Institute, which is right next to us in Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, has initiated what is called a world-leading comprehensive cancer center, which would be really a public-private sort of partnership. And this would be over the next sort of 10 years. So in the last sort of month, I've been speaking to the chair of this Harry Perkins Cancer Center, Institute, and this is where we've got to so far. So very much like what you've heard from the previous speakers, we are on the radar, and we have started initiating a sort of working plan model to somehow introduce into this comprehensive cancer center at least a proton facility, and we feel that it may be justifiable with the numbers that we have in WA. So that's where we've got to, Peter, and that's really essentially the only updates I've got at this point in time.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that very much. So thank you for your time and update. And lastly, we're actually working to time, so we'll switch now to Dr. Giuseppe Sasso from New Zealand.
So I'm providing you a little bit of an update about what is happening in New Zealand. To be fair, similar to other jurisdictions, there hasn't been any news or exciting developments with regards to particle therapy in the country. But there are a couple of other things that are with regards to healthcare in general and provision of cancer services, which may have an impact on how we provide care for our population. So it's probably going to be useful to go through them very quickly. I have a couple of disclosures to make before we start. I'm heavily OCD and kind of addicted to precision radiation therapy, and that's why is my interest for particle therapy more than any current role really in any leadership position. So the government has announced a new reshape of the healthcare system, and there's a new website that actually highlighted this, which you all can access. The current status quo, arguably, so this is the website that is called The Future of Health, which, to be honest, it's was long overdue, and it's very welcome. As you probably can see here from the slides, this is the current situation in New Zealand, where you have about 20 district health boards for a country population of about 4.5 to 5 million people, and a number of other organizations, including primary health, public health units, regional shared service agreement. It's all extremely messy and extremely expensive to run, because having 20 district health boards for only a population that doesn't even reach the 5 million is arguably not a very cost-effective of delivering care. What is going to happen is pretty much a national health system kind of model. This will have a much greater input from Ministry of Health around stewardship, strategy and policy, and the creation of an agency called Health New Zealand, which will work in parallel with the Maori Health Authority. The reason for Maori Health Authority is obvious to everyone because of the poorer outcome that unfortunately this pocket population, as well as other pocket populations, are actually suffering in New Zealand, which is a shame for the country. It needs to absolutely be sorted. So it's a much leaner structure, but we don't really know much yet, other than probably there will be 3 or 4 hubs, major hubs across the country. The chair of Health New Zealand is Mr. Campbell, who's a well-known leader and chairman across a number of successful other enterprises. So the other great news was last year, the appointment of Lisa as CEO of the newly created Cancer Control Agency. The Cancer Control Agency has a mission of helping Kiwis to living well with cancer, addressing the resources for health professionals, and also provide us with data reports publication. And in the longer scheme, it will not only coordinate and address inequalities, but also have a greater role in the way cancer services are provided. And I'm aware that he has already made contacts with Michael Penman and the Bragg Institute, which is great about about having inputs around how we provide, especially for our pediatric patients, state-of-the-art care, which is very heartening. New Zealand, thankfully, has actually a good tradition of providing good care for pediatric patients. The gap between New Zealand and Australia across this subgroup of cancer services is less wide in terms of outcome that happens across other subgroups, which is probably due to the fact that the majority of these patients are actually enrolled into clinical trials. So going back to the Cancer Control Agency, provided some very exciting tools. I've been always raving about the Radiation Oncology online tool, which has made us aware of a significant problem that comes with intervention rate in New Zealand. The data from Auckland are a bit skewed because we're missing some of the private data, but yet the intervention rate is arguably about 20 points below what it should be. And that's it, just to introduce the concept as that was highlighted by Claire and also by Lizzie, that really there are some bigger problems at the moment on the plate of healthcare system providers, and that needs to be addressed. But nevertheless, we'll be definitely looking at options for selected indications where required, and we'll look forward for collaboration with the Bragg Institute or other providers across the ditch. Ideally, this would be something that could also have active participation of New Zealand clinicians into the management and decision making. It's a little bit unfortunate that the cancer plan does not mention anything about particle therapy, but the cancer plan, to be fair, was just a broad brush kind of highlight of the need to address inequalities and the postcode lottery that is currently happening in the country. No questions, this will be solved in the future. We probably can anticipate about 100 pediatric patients, 80, 90, 100 pediatric patients coming from New Zealand for particle therapy if all the pediatric indications are being met. I was hoping to present some data with regards to skull-based chordomas and spine malignancies, but unfortunately I don't have them available in time. But I probably have a handful of cases. As you can see, the majority are coming from probably our jurisdictions in the northern region, which is where I work. And I guess with this, I pretty much finished my presentation, but happy to take questions if you guys would like to. And thank you so much for this team. I hope we'll be successful as other teams have been lately.
Thank you, Pepe. That's a great last slide. I'm married to an Italian, so I know how you feel. That was a great win, actually. So with that, we thank you, Pepe. We'll just give you a round of applause for that update from New Zealand. Thank you to the other speakers.